Hey, welcome back to the Black Pill. We are on part 5 of the web series about sex, gender, and sexuality. And today we're getting into sexuality, into same-sex and other sex relations. Am I the guy for this? Man, am I the guy for this? There are people who are on the GLBTQIA plus spectrum much more securely than I am, and almost certainly the thing you should be doing is going and listening to them. I'm going to try and touch very, very lightly here because this is not my stuff. It's just not my stuff, and I don't want to misrepresent anyone's experiences or make assumptions. So, very, very light touches here. All right. So, in the beginning, we talked about reification. There probably isn't any such thing, strictly speaking, as gay or straight. And those things are probably not as opposite as some folks might like to think they are. They're just descriptors for phenomena we see in the world, and we just want to be really careful how we apply labels to things. Probably it makes the most sense to talk about this as a continuum from mostly interested in same sex relations to mostly interested in other sex relations, but even that gets really complicated. In the beginning there was straight, and anyone who was not a straight man was deviant. So the American Psychiatric Association's so-called Bible of psychiatry used to list homosexuality as a sexual deviance, as a psychiatric disorder or mental illness to be treated. And it took gay psychiatry and psychology doing a sit-in at the American Psychiatric Association conference to get that out of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And now we're pretty much all on board. I mean, there's a few foot draggers and a few knuckle draggers, but we're basically all on board that that same sex orientation is just no kind of big deal. It is not in and of itself any sort of mental illness or deviance. It is true that people on the GLBT spectrum are more likely to be depressed and anxious, but think about what it's like to be a minority in a majority country. Think about what it's like to be non heteronormative or non heteroconforming in a place that demands hetero performances of us, that enforces heterosexuality. And of course, people would be anxious, and of course, people would be depressed. Okay, gay is about more than who someone wants to do sex with. Years ago, we would say sexual preference. And that was fine. Like, even people in the community would say sexual preference. But kind of the Christians and the right wing activists have gotten a hold of the word preference, and they think, or they espouse the idea that people could have these attractions and resist them, that actually you could be gay but not do any gay things, and instead just sort of train yourself to be straight and do straight things. And so the community is now off of the word preference. It never was really just a preference. It's an orientation, it's an unchanging, immutable characteristic that's about the person. And there just really isn't any wiggle room on that. I don't know who's on my channel like looking for wiggle room uh, around GLBT issues. I guess some of the people watching might be Nazis, but there really is no wiggle room here. Okay, next thing is gay would have some cultural meaning. Have some cultural meaning, and it can only have cultural meaning in a place where GLBT is accepted and acceptable. Um, Ahmadinejad he was the premier of Iran for a while. He used to say that there are no gay people in Iran. And he was kind of, in a sense, right about that. Because in Iran, they would imprison or execute anyone who did same sex relationship stuff. That's it. And so you can't have a culture of people who have same sex attractions, who have a history, who have a history of resistance, Stonewall, who have a history of pride parades, a history of tragedy, the AIDS crisis, and how the American government reacted to the AIDS crisis. So gay would have cultural signifiers, maybe not super clear ones, maybe not as clear as some other cultural indicators, but those would be present, right? Um, when we do the acronym, I guess most people start with the LGBT, uh, for no particular reason. I haven't been doing that. I'm going to try to sort of go with the flow on this one. I usually say GBLT, uh, or GLBT, depending whether I'm thinking about sandwiches or the order in which we started to acknowledge identities. Okay. So gay would be men attracted to men, lesbian would be women attracted to women, bi would be people attracted to either men or women. And so you'd have these continua, and over here is interest in the same sex, and over here is interest in the opposite sex. But the straightest person, whoever straight it is straight, can still appreciate someone of their same sex, and maybe have some feelings about that, and maybe have to deny some feelings about that. You know, so like I can look at Jason Momoa with his shirt off and understand why my wife is really interested in seeing superhero movies all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Um, there it is. And there have been men in my life who I've just sort of run into, and we've looked at each other and made that eye contact, and we both blushed, and we've had to have a conversation about that. What does this mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for me? Um, there, and I'm pretty much of a cishet dude. I'm not particularly troubled by those encounters. They're just a thing that happens sometimes, and there you go. So you have these continua, and then by 1920, people were starting to give the nod to the idea that people could be bisexual. You could be homosexual, you could be heterosexual, the nomenclature of the time, you could be bisexual. You're interested in either sex. And here's where we hit sort of a modern snag or snare or roadblock or complication. Is that only works if you're hanging out in traditional gender norms. So lots of people in modernity identify as bi. Uh, you know, your identity is your identity. It's nothing to do with me. Um, and at the same time, as sex starts to break down as a category, then an orientation toward a sex starts to break down as a descriptor. And so what we get now is pansexual, and pan is in the plus on GLBT IAQ plus. Someone who's pan just isn't interested in what toys their partner brings to the party. They just want to party, right? Because if you can have men with vaginas and women with penises and all possible combinations of body parts and orientations and gender performances, then an either or approach, I like men and women, doesn't make very much sense in that environment. Again, there are people who would have traditional gender roles and views and sex roles and views, and this is absolutely not a call out. It's a prediction. It's a prediction that bi as an identity starts to fade into the future. It becomes less common in the future. Fewer younger people are going to identify as bi than their elders did, and more people are going to identify as pan, because it's not about what we bring to the party. It's something else. It's sexy about just being a human being willing to show affection for another human being. So there's that. Um, GLB, gay, lesbian, bi. Trans is not an orientation. We'll get to that in the next video. I for intersexed. We did that in the last video. Ace, the aces. Asexual people, just not interested. Just by and large, not turned on in most circumstances, or sometimes in any circumstance. The basis for a relationship needn't always be sex and sexual attraction. And so your aces just don't. An ace could do sex as a favor for somebody else. They could do sex as relationship maintenance. In fact, most sex that happens is not about procreation or passion. It's about maintaining relationships. But that's not going to be their, probably not going to be their primary criterion for seeking out relationships. And then the plus in GLBTIA, oh, the QQ. Two Qs. Queer is still a slur in some circles. Queer is still a slur in some circles. Some of your elder activists stole back, claimed the word queer because it was a slur, and just like many folks over time have taken the words that are used about them and used those words on themselves with better and more wholesome connotations, queer gets appropriated by the movement. And so younger people might not have this history with the word, with that word being used as not only a slur, but even a threat. You know, if you're sitting at the bar having a cocktail and someone comes over and calls you the Q word, that might mean that they are looking to take you outside and beat the crap out of you. So just be sensitive about how you bandy about the Q word here. And for other people, it's no problem. It's so thoroughly reclaimed, or people will cover their disdain for it in the hopes of reclaiming it in the future. So I was at a table with exactly some of the elder activists. We were at a convention, a sci-fi fantasy convention, and I was flogging books, and I was invited to be at their table, and I sat at their table. Their table skirt was a bunch of gay cowboys, and it was really cool. I'm a little moved by all of the gay men who came over because they saw those gay cowboys on the tablecloth. And they had felt like they were just left out of fiction. There weren't books by, for, and about them. And so there's this table full of books by, for, and about them. And then there was me, and I was just selling some like basic sci-fi stuff. Anyway, I'm talking to these elder activists, and the way they use the word queer might not match up with what people think it is in modernity. But the description I got at that time from these folks was queer is kind of a mashup of sexual orientation and sexual identity. This is before we had disambiguated gender from sex. You know, this is the 70s and the early 80s. So you could say that what he was talking about was gender, but he wasn't at the time. So it's kind of not feeling like performing masculinity or in particular femininity, and also not having the orientation, the attractions that would go with that sexual identity. So queer would just be kind of interested in whoever you're interested in, and wearing whatever you want to wear and acting however you want to act. And it's kind of maybe different from the way people throw the word around in modernity, either as a slur or just to mean gay. So make of that what you will. And then there's the questioning. Sometimes we grow up in really, really repressive places. Sometimes we grow up in a place where it's not acknowledged that people could have same sex attractions. It's a heteronormative, hetero enforcing culture. So even a show like The Big Bang Theory, which is not about traditional norms in any way, ends with four weddings. Like all of the principal characters get married and walk off the show. Uh yeah, that's hetero. That's hetero enforcing. And in grade school, maybe all of your examples of humans and all of your role models on TV and all of the people in the movies are hetero. If there's a gay person, they're a horrible stereotype. And so it never occurs to you that you yourself might have some same-sex attractions. But you get out of the environment that you're in. Maybe you get out of your parents' house. Maybe you go to college and you start meeting new people. And it starts to occur to you that, well, I'm not exactly straight. Not exactly straight. And that would be the questioning. Okay? And then in the plus. In the plus, you would have pan, and that's people who would not describe themselves as bi because they slipped out of those sort of traditional views of sex and gender. Um, there's neuroqueer. These are identities that are like, I hesitate to say new. They are new identities, but people have always felt this way. They just haven't had the freedom to label their selves and explore those identities. So it's identities that are too small or too, let's say, new, carefully, um, to be in the main acronym. And the main acronym, of course, gets longer and longer and longer over time. So the plus is just that nod. There are a bunch of ways of being here, a bunch of identities here that we're not going to explicitly give a letter to. It becomes unwieldy, right? So pan is in there, neuroqueer is in there. Uh, Neuroqueer started in like 1990 or so, and it was the idea. Don't worry, it failed. This idea failed. This is the idea that gay people might be autistic and autistic people might be gay. That if there's a Venn diagram between gay and autistic, there might be that overlap there. And that overlap would be neuroqueer. For neurological reasons, the person is gay. That doesn't withstand scrutiny, so just let that one go. And the more modern usage of neuroqueer, which is still exceptionally rare, is that it's hard to be masculine and disabled. It's hard to be feminine and disabled. And like, don't come at me with your outrage. If you want a better picture, bring a better face, man. There are people putting a lot of effort into being masculine and disabled or feminine and disabled. But that outside view of the person is just not likely to be of a purely masculine or feminine person. It is hard work to be disabled and masculine. And when someone experiences autism, it's very hard to present as masculine or feminine. Indeed, it might be so hard and so arbitrary. So arbitrary. Okay, so now we are on ground I can talk about from an inside perspective. My peers, when I was a kid, my peers always tried to get me to read the Bible. And they thought if I read the Bible, I'd be very impressed and then I'd turn into a Christian overnight. So I did. I read the Bible, but it didn't make any sense. Like the parts that are supposed to be true versus the parts that are supposed to be allegorical are totally arbitrary. There's no logic. There's no logic to it. It lacks internal consistency. Thou shalt not kill. Except this long laundry list of people you're supposed to kill, from Canaanites to witches, you know? So I couldn't be a Christian. And for a while I went around and read every religious founding text. I read the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, some other stuff, the Mormon one, and none of it has the internal consistency someone like me would need in order to develop any faith that these were truths. And the same thing is true of the performances of masculinity and femininity. That there are people performing masculinity, and that those masculine performances are arbitrary. What makes a man and what makes a woman, it's almost totally arbitrary. And I just can't condone it or go along with it. And so, given a certain reluctance to change my behavior to sort of please the masses, and given that even if I did, I can't quite succeed at being very masculine, I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested in trying. And that would be neuroqueer. That I'd be open to performing gender in different ways. Like I grow my hair out, and then every 5 years or so I donate it to Locks of Love because um, girls always comment that my hair is beautiful and they wish they could have my hair. They don't comment that my hair is beautiful and therefore they want to make out or anything like that. They don't want to be with me for my hair. They want my hair. And so I grow it out and I give it to this charity that makes wigs for little girls with alopecia. So they literally can. They literally can have that hair. And I'm pretty much of a cishet dude. Like I'm in this big male body and I feel it. I feel like a big male person, whatever that means. And I'm pretty much heterosexual. That there are times when I see a beautiful man and have some feeling, but I'm really not interested in pursuing that feeling. I like to look at women. There it is. I like to be with women, but I wouldn't be threatened. When I see a man and have that reaction, I wouldn't necessarily be threatened by that. It's just another thing that's happening, and it's all right. Okay, so I'd say I'm like 5% neuroqueer, just a little bit neuroqueer, because I can't perform gender the way people want, and I'm not interested in doing it. All right, is gay a real thing? We addressed that reification. But orientations seem to be fixed, immutable properties. There's probably no point trying to make gay people straight or straight people gay. It's probably a pointless endeavor, and it certainly does more harm than good. So things like conversion therapies really just damage people's self esteem and make them more prone to suicide. Man, leave it alone. Leave it alone. There's some sort of conflicting research on brain regions, which part of a brain would make somebody gay, and I just like to caution you about neuro nonsense. That most of the reporting outsiders get about neuroscience is pretty fake. I'll try and remember to link for you the Royal Institute talk on neuro nonsense, which is it's banging. And there's a Q&A afterwards, which is absolute fire. Really, really good stuff. So we're not really on very firm epistemological ground when we're talking about brains. And even if we could find some difference between gay male brains and straight male brains, what would that mean? What would that mean? Would it mean some outside factor like hormone levels cause the person to develop their brain region in this way that cause them to be gay? Or would it mean that they just inherently are gay, regardless of their brain structure, and for some other reason, um, and their gayness, their worldview, and activities lead to the change in the shape of this brain region. It'd be super ambiguous. There's almost no point in talking about it. Um, Other stuff. So, getting folks from the GLBTQ spectrum to hang out and do science to find out why they're gay is notoriously difficult. And I would support that. I would say, folks on that spectrum, when you're asked to participate in science to find out why, it is entirely fair to resist that. There is not a gene for gay. There's not a gene for gay. But let's imagine, do a thought experiment in your head. Let's imagine that science one day discovered the gene for gay. What would be the logical next step? Exactly. What is the point of looking for the cause of gay if it is not to eradicate gay? Um, Knowledge is responsibility. And if parents could know in advance the orientation of their children, they could abort those children. They could selectively remove gay people from society. Uh, I have tremendous sympathy. I have tremendous sympathy for people not wanting to have their selfhoods explained scientifically. As the autistic guy in the room, if parents at Autism Speaks or something could find out why their children were autistic, there isn't a gene for autism, but what if there were? What would be the logical next step? Like, what do you want to do? Get rid of me? Do you want to get rid of me? Because I feel like I have a right to exist. I feel like I bring something to existence that neurotypical people don't bring. The ability to sort of loiter in the realm of abstraction, the ability to hang out in the Alam al Mithal, where the Platonic solids are real. Hey, masculinity is super fragile. All kinds of research on this. When we prime men, okay, look, what you can do is have men take surveys, and then, regardless of their answers on the surveys, tell half of them the survey suggests that actually they're quite masculine, and tell the other half the survey suggests that they aren't very masculine, and then observe their interactions with other people, especially women, after getting that feedback on those surveys. The men who are told that they are quite masculine are decent human beings, and the men told that they're not very masculine, their behavior towards other people definitely suffers as they try to compensate. That's just one data point. Masculinity is very fragile. Femininity is not. And thus, when we're in the research about same sex orientations, lesbians don't get that much love. Lesbians don't get that much attention in the research. People aren't interested. Men aren't interested. Men are interested in why other men would be gay because their own masculinity is so fragile. If some men could be interested in men, shit, I could be interested in men. And that is a threatening thought for most men in a society like ours that is somewhat sexist and pretty heterosexist and pretty male dominated. Threatening kinds of thoughts. So I was going to lead you through some of the research on same-sex orientation, and then I thought to myself, but why bother, actually? Like, why would you care? Why would you care why the research suggests some men are gay? Um, that's all. So I'm just going to let it go there. Thanks for tuning in, and the next episode will be probably even shorter than this episode. It's about how trans concerns have changed really over the last 30 or 40 years. Okay, thanks, bye.